My name is Penelope Lopez. I'm 34 years old, and the story I'm about to tell you happened on a Sunday in April of this year, one of those soft spring days where the sunlight looks harmless, almost holy, like it couldn't possibly witness something ugly. That Sunday, my family gathered at my parents' house in suburban Minneapolis. Sunlight streamed through the old lace curtains my mom refused to replace, turning the oak floor into a patchwork of gold. My dad's crisp laughter, Howard's laughter, mixed with my mom Sylvia's gentle voice, the one she used whenever she wanted everyone to believe things were fine. The house smelled like sugar and butter and something warm. Waffles, our family's special occasions dessert. Which was funny because none of us could agree on what qualified as a special occasion anymore, except my parents. To them, having my sister home with a new baby was special enough to make the whole house orbit around it. Valerie had given birth to her first daughter 3 months ago, baby Ella. Valerie was temporarily staying with our parents because her husband, Mike, was away on business in Boston, and she said she needed support. Support was a word Valerie loved, mostly because it sounded like love, without requiring her to give much back. "Look at these tiny toes," my dad exclaimed, lifting Ella and cuddling her like she was the last fragile piece of joy in the world. His smile made the wrinkles around his eyes deepen, the same wrinkles that used to appear when Brady made him laugh. Used to. My mom hovered near them with her phone held high, snapping picture after picture, whispering to herself about sending them to her friends in the knitting club to show off her first granddaughter. That phrase, first granddaughter, landed quietly in my chest like a pebble, because Brady was their first grandchild. But the room didn't feel like it remembered that. My boyfriend, Carter, stood near the crib with a careful kind of patience. He wasn't Brady's biological father, but he loved Brady like he'd been written into his life on purpose, not by accident. Carter offered to help with the food, asked my mom where things went, smiled when my dad made the same 3 jokes he always made. He was trying, he always tried. Valerie stood beside him, rocking Ella's pink crib gently with one hand like she was conducting the entire atmosphere. "She has eyes just like yours," Carter said warmly, leaning in to look at the baby's face. Valerie's expression softened into that radiant new mother glow people talk about, like her whole identity had fused to the baby in her arms. "But the nose is like Mike's," Valerie replied, beaming. "He really regrets not being here." The room hummed with laughter, soft conversation, a picture of family happiness so perfect it almost made me suspicious. And that was when I noticed Brady. While everyone crowded around the crib, Brady sat on a stool in the corner with his legs swinging, but never touching the ground. He wasn't sulking, he wasn't pouting, he was waiting. Like a child who doesn't know where to place himself when the room has decided he's not the main story anymore. I watched him for too long, and something inside me tightened. Because I knew that look. That look wasn't jealousy. It was loneliness. I started toward him, and that's when I felt a small hand tug my sleeve. Brady looked up at me with his big round blue eyes. His lips trembled like he was trying to be brave and failing. "Mom," he whispered, voice barely louder than the ticking of my parents' antique clock. "Do they like the baby more than me?" The question didn't come out dramatic, it came out wounded. My throat closed. I sat down quickly, pulled him into my arms, and held him tight enough to make sure he could feel the truth through my skin. "No," I said softly, pressing my cheek to his hair. "Brady, listen to me. You are the most wonderful thing that's ever happened to me. No one can replace you. Not ever." He nodded, but his eyes stayed uncertain, like he wanted to believe me, but didn't know if the room would agree. And then Valerie's voice drifted in from behind me, quieter, sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. "Carter," she whispered. I looked up. Valerie had stepped close to Carter near the crib. She didn't know I could hear her, or maybe she did and didn't care. "Don't you think your nephew is jealous of Ella?" she murmured, eyes flicking toward Brady like he was a problem that needed naming. "He keeps staring at her." Carter's posture stiffened. "He's 6, Carter replied calmly. "He's adjusting. That's normal. Brady's a good kid." Valerie's smile stayed in place, but something behind it hardened. "I'm just saying," she replied. "Babies bring out feelings." I wanted to step in. I wanted to shut it down right then. But my phone buzzed before I could speak. An insurance representative. My stomach sank. They needed to meet immediately to inspect roof damage from the storm last week. We'd been waiting 2 weeks for this appointment. Rescheduling would push it out another month, and we couldn't risk that. Carter read my expression and understood instantly. The adult world, the bills, the paperwork, the consequences, had come barging into our family day like it owned the place. We stepped into the kitchen for a quick discussion. We'll be gone an hour, Carter said. Your parents are here. Valerie's here. Brady will be fine. I wanted to agree. I wanted to believe that family meant safety. But I couldn't forget Brady's question, or the way Valerie had looked at him when she said the word jealous. Still, we didn't have a choice. So I returned to the living room, knelt in front of Brady, and gripped his small shoulders. Sweetheart, I said, forcing brightness into my voice. Mom and Carter will be back in an hour. Okay? You can do puzzles with Grandma and Grandpa. Maybe show them your dinosaur game. Brady's eyes flicked toward the crib, then back to me. He nodded slowly, reluctantly, like he was agreeing because he didn't want to cause trouble. But his face held a worry too old for 6 years. I kissed his forehead, and as I stood up, an uneasy feeling slid through me, thin as a shadow. I brushed it away. Because where is safer than family? Where is safer than grandparents who spoil him, a house filled with laughter, a room full of people who have known him since he was born? That's what I told myself. That was my mistake, because 40 minutes later, my phone would ring, and my son's name would be spoken like a crime. We drove to Mr. Caldwell's house, and on the way, Carter and I talked about roof repair, paperwork, deductibles, ordinary things people talk about when they think their world is steady. By the time we sat down on Mr. Caldwell's brown leather sofa, my mind had fully left my parents' living room behind. I was signing forms. Carter was listening. Mr. Caldwell was explaining the process. And then my phone buzzed, hard, violently. The name on the screen made me frown. Valerie. I stood up, already annoyed by the interruption. I'm sorry, I told Mr. Caldwell. I need to take this. I stepped into the hallway, pressed the phone to my ear, and said, Valerie? I didn't even get a full second. Her voice exploded into my ear, trembling, furious, sharp with panic. Your son deliberately tried to hurt my baby. My body went cold. For a moment, I couldn't understand the words in the order she'd said them, like my brain refused to assemble that sentence into reality. What? I stammered. Valerie, what are you talking about? I'm not joking, she screamed. I went to warm milk in the kitchen, and when I came back, I saw Brady pushing Ella off the crib, onto the floor. My vision blurred. My mouth went dry. No, I said automatically. No, that's impossible. There has to be. Valerie, Brady would never... There's no misunderstanding, she cut in, voice cracking with rage. I called the police. They're on their way. The word police hit me like a slap. My knees almost buckled. Behind me, Carter appeared in the hallway, eyes already asking what was wrong. I lifted a shaking hand, covering one side of my face like I could hold myself together physically. Valerie, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. Brady is 6 years old. I know your son is jealous, she snapped. I saw the way he looked at her all morning. Carter's hand came to my shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. I couldn't breathe. And then, in one swift motion, Carter took the phone from my hand. His voice was calm, but his eyes were blazing. Protective fire. Valerie, he said tightly, what are you saying? Brady is a good child. What happened to Ella? Is she okay? I couldn't hear Valerie's response clearly. Only Carter's expression changing, tightening, like each word from my sister was pushing him closer to something he didn't want to become. He ended the call, and I stared at him like I didn't recognize the world anymore. Carter didn't sugarcoat it. She's already called the police, he said. We need to go, now. I turned back toward Mr. Caldwell's living room, barely able to speak my apology. And as Carter guided me out the door, my thoughts spiraled in all directions at once. Brady's trembling voice, Valerie's suspicious eyes, the crib by the window, the way my family had laughed like everything was perfect, and the one sickening truth pounding through my chest. My son was alone in that house, and someone had decided he was capable of something monstrous. When we pulled onto my parents' street, I saw it. The black and white patrol car parked out front, and I swear, in that second, my heart didn't just break. It fell. The patrol car in my parents' driveway looked wrong in the same way blood looks wrong when you see it on a child. Too bright, too official, too final. Carter didn't even wait for me to turn off the engine. He shoved the car door open, already moving, like his body had decided Brady needed him more than his fear did. Penelope, he said, voice low but urgent, stay with me. As if I might drift off into shock and never come back. I stumbled after him, my legs heavy, my hands numb. The April air felt cold on my face, even though the sun was still out. Even though, just an hour ago, this same street had felt like childhood. Safe lawns, familiar mailboxes, my parents' tidy garden with the blue wind chimes. Now it felt like a crime scene dressed up as a family home. Before we reached the porch, Carter was dialing my mom again, straight to voicemail. He dialed my dad. Nothing. He dialed Valerie. No answer. My stomach twisted. What if something's really wrong with Ella? I whispered, hating myself for the thought even as it formed. What if she... Carter shook his head sharply. We'll deal with the baby's condition when we see it, but Brady... His jaw clenched. Brady didn't do this on purpose, I know that. I wanted to say I knew it too. I did know it. Brady was sweet, sensitive, the kind of kid who apologized when he accidentally stepped on a flower. But the word police changes the air around a child. It makes innocence feel flimsy. And it makes grown-ups start telling themselves stories, ugly stories, just to justify their panic. Carter pushed the front door open without knocking. We stepped inside, and the house that had smelled like waffles and warmth an hour earlier now smelled like tension. And something sharper underneath, like fear had its own scent. My parents' living room had never felt so small. Family photos hung on the walls, Christmas smiles, beach trips, birthdays, frozen memories of people who looked like they trusted each other. The old grandfather clock ticked loudly, like it was counting down to something irreversible. 2 police officers stood in the center of the room. The older one had salt and pepper hair and a face that looked tired, in a way that said he'd seen too many families tear themselves apart over one accusation. The younger officer kept writing in a notebook, his pen moving fast, eyes flicking up only when someone raised their voice. And Valerie stood near the crib, clutching Ella to her chest as if the baby were the last piece of proof she owned. Her eyes were red, her cheeks blotchy, but her posture wasn't soft. It was rigid, defensive, ready to win. Then I saw Brady. My son was in the corner of the room, huddled on the floor like a little animal that had learned the world could become dangerous in minutes. His face was wet with tears. His small shoulders shook, but he made no sound, like he'd already been punished for making any. The sight of him hit me so hard I nearly choked. I moved toward him, but Valerie's voice sliced through the room before I could take 2 steps. There! She snapped, pointing at Brady like he was a stranger who'd broken into our lives. He pushed Ella off the crib. I saw it with my own eyes. My body went hot with rage. How could you say that like that? I heard myself say, my voice coming out sharper than I expected. He's 6, Valerie. Carter didn't even look at Valerie. He went straight to Brady. He dropped to his knees, placing his body between Brady and the rest of the room, like a shield made of muscle and love. Hey, Carter murmured, gentle now, as if the world's volume needed to lower around my child. Buddy, look at me. Brady lifted his face slowly. His eyes were swollen and terrified, and when he saw Carter, a new wave of tears rolled down his cheeks, silent, helpless. That was when it hit me with full force. Brady wasn't just scared. He was confused, because the people who were supposed to protect him were treating him like a threat. I turned to my parents, my voice almost pleading. Mom? Dad? I asked, searching their faces. What happened? Who saw what? Tell me. Tell them. What happened? Howard stood stiffly near the fireplace, his hands clenched at his sides. He looked older than he had this morning, like guilt had carved deeper lines into his face. Sylvia stood near him, pressing a hand to her mouth as tears spilled over her fingers. Neither of them spoke. That silence was its own kind of betrayal. The older officer stepped forward slightly, his tone professional, but not cruel. Ma'am, he said to me, we received a call reporting that a child may have deliberately endangered an infant. We need to clarify the situation. Right now, we're just gathering information. Gathering information, I repeated, my voice trembling. My son is sitting on the floor like he's been sentenced. Valerie let out a shaky breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Don't make me the villain, she snapped. I'm protecting my baby. Any mother would. I stared at her. There was a time I would have believed that. But protecting your baby doesn't require destroying a child who shares your blood. The older officer turned toward Brady. Son, he said gently, can you tell me what happened? Brady's lips trembled. His eyes darted around the room like he was trying to find the right answer, the safe answer, the one that wouldn't make everyone hate him more. And then he whispered, voice broken. I didn't mean to. There was a snake. The room paused, like time itself didn't know what to do with that sentence. Valerie's head snapped up. There was no snake, she said loudly, her voice rising so high that Ella startled and began to wail. He's lying. He's jealous. He's been staring at her all morning. He wanted her gone. Stop, I said, stepping forward, my hands shaking. Stop saying that like you know what's in his heart. Valerie's eyes flashed. I know what I saw. Carter's voice cut in, controlled but cold. What you saw, he said, was a moment, and you turned it into a story that makes you feel righteous. Valerie looked offended, like the idea of being questioned was an attack. You weren't even here, she snapped. Carter stood up slowly, still keeping one hand on Brady's shoulder. I was here all morning, he said, and I watched Brady sit alone in that corner while everyone treated Ella like she was the only person in the room who mattered. If Brady looked at her, it wasn't jealousy. His voice tightened. It was sadness. My throat burned. The older officer raised his hand, a quiet signal for everyone to breathe. To clarify, he said, we need evidence. Do you have security cameras inside this room? My stomach dropped. I already knew the answer. Howard swallowed hard. Only at the front door. The officer nodded slowly, like that wasn't surprising. Like families rarely install cameras in the rooms where they love each other. Valerie's mouth tightened. And there it was. Just for a second, a small flicker of satisfaction in her expression. The look of someone who believed the lack of evidence meant her truth would become law. Carter noticed it too. His eyes narrowed, like he was seeing Valerie clearly for the first time. I felt nauseous. So this was what my sister had become when she was afraid. A woman who would rather be right than be careful. A woman who would rather accuse than ask. A neighbor might have cameras, Howard said suddenly, stepping forward. All heads turned toward him. It was the first time all day my father's voice had sounded firm. I think Philip Whitman next door has a camera, he continued, voice tense but determined. One of them points toward our living room window. I argued with him about it last month. Valerie frowned. Philip? The one you hate? Howard's jaw flexed. Yes, him. The older officer's eyes sharpened. If there's footage that shows what happened, we need to see it. Hope, small and fragile, flickered in my chest. Not relief yet. Not safety. Just hope. Because if there was footage, then Brady's fear could end. But then another thought stabbed through me. If there was footage, we'd also see the exact moment my sister decided my son was capable of evil. Howard turned to me, his eyes wet. Penelope, he said quietly, I'll go. I'll handle Philip. Carter stepped in immediately. I'm coming too. No, I said, my voice firm in a way that surprised even me. I'm coming. Because if this was the moment truth was found, I needed to be there. I needed to watch it with my own eyes. I needed to hold on to whatever proof would give my son his childhood back. So Howard and I left the living room with the older officer, the three of us moving toward Philip Whitman's house like we were walking toward a verdict. Behind us, I heard Valerie's voice still arguing, still justifying. And I heard Ella crying. And somewhere inside that chaos, my son's silence felt louder than anything else. As we stepped outside into the sunlight, the air felt surreal, too pretty for what was happening. My dad's shoulders were tense, like he was carrying the weight of his own hesitation. I really did argue with Philip, Howard muttered, as we walked down the path between the lawns. I told him the camera was an invasion. I demanded he move it. The older officer nodded, calm. People do that sometimes. Privacy is important. But if the camera is on his property and angled legally, he has rights too. Howard exhaled, regret thick in his voice. I know that now. I stared at my father. This was the first time I'd ever heard him admit he might have been wrong about something without being forced. And it took my son being accused of a crime to bring it out. We reached Philip's front door. The officer stood slightly behind us, giving my dad space. Howard lifted his hand and knocked. For a moment, nothing happened. My pulse thudded in my ears. Brady's future, his sense of being believed, felt like it was trapped behind this door. And then the door opened. Philip Whitman appeared, middle-aged, surprised, eyes widening as he took in my father, me, and the police uniform. His gaze sharpened quickly. Howard, he said cautiously. What is this? Howard swallowed, pride fighting humility in his throat. Then, finally, he stepped forward, eyes honest. Philip, my dad said, voice rough, I need your help. I know we've had our differences, but this is about my grandson. Philip's eyes flicked to me, to the officer, to my father's face. And then his expression changed, not to satisfaction, to concern. Come in, he said after a beat, stepping aside. Tell me what happened. As we crossed Philip's threshold, I felt something shift inside me. Because sometimes the people you fought with are the ones who show up when your own family fails. And I didn't know yet what the footage would reveal. I only knew my son was running out of time in that living room. Philip's house smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner, the kind of quiet, orderly scent that told you this was a man who liked control of his space, his boundaries, his life. And suddenly, that control was the only thing standing between my son and a lie that could follow him forever. Philip closed the door behind us and glanced once more at the police officer's badge before turning back to my dad. You said this is about your grandson, he said carefully. Start there. Howard nodded, his shoulders stiff. For a man who'd spent his life believing he was always right, this was unfamiliar territory. There was an incident, my dad began, voice heavy. My daughter, Valerie, accused my grandson Brady of hurting her baby. The police are involved. Philip's brow furrowed. He didn't look smug. He didn't look vindicated. He looked concerned. I need to know if your camera caught anything, Howard continued, swallowing hard. I know I gave you hell about it last month. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Those words hung in the air. An apology from my father wasn't just rare, it was seismic. Philip studied him for a long second, then shifted his gaze to me. You're Brady's mom? He asked. I nodded. Yes. His expression softened just a little. All right, he said. Let's take a look. He led us into a small office at the back of the house. One wall was dominated by a large computer monitor, cables neatly organized, everything labeled. This wasn't a casual setup. Philip gestured to a swivel chair. I could pull it up on my phone, he said, glancing at the officer. But for something like this, details matter. Better on the big screen. I liked him for that immediately. He sat down, fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. I installed the system 2 months ago, Philip explained. High resolution, wide angle. This camera points toward your father's living room window because it's positioned on my property line. I didn't angle it to spy, just to cover the perimeter. The officer nodded. Understood. Philip clicked through folders with practiced ease. Timestamp should be about an hour ago, he said. Here. My heart slammed against my ribs. He pressed play. The screen lit up. At first it was mundane, almost painfully normal. My parents' living room appeared from an outside angle through the open window. The image was clearer than I expected. Too clear. I could see Valerie holding Ella, placing her gently into the crib near the window. She adjusted the pillow, smoothed the blanket, leaned down to coo at her. Then she turned on the television. Loud. Too loud. My breath caught. I remembered that sound. The background noise that swallowed everything else. On the screen, my dad and Mom walked toward the back door. Before leaving, Mom bent down and kissed Brady's forehead. Dad leaned close to him, clearly saying something. We'll play puzzles after I finish fixing the pipe, Howard muttered beside me, recognizing the moment. His voice cracked. We were only gone 10 minutes. The screen showed Brady sitting on the sofa, legs swinging, dinosaur toys scattered near his feet. Alone. Valerie lingered a moment longer, her eyes flicking toward Brady, not soft, not warm, watchful. Then she disappeared into the kitchen. The living room was quiet now, except for the television. Brady played with his dinosaurs, occasionally glancing toward the crib, not obsessively, not aggressively, just aware, like a child left in charge of a silence he didn't ask for. Suddenly, the older police officer leaned closer to the screen. Pause, he said sharply. Philip froze the frame. The officer pointed to the left side of the window frame. What's that? He asked. We all leaned in, and there it was, clear, undeniable. A small snake, slithering slowly along the windowsill, its body catching the light as it moved inside. I felt the blood drain from my face. Oh my God, I whispered. The officer squinted. Looks like a young copperhead. They're attracted to warmth, sometimes the scent of milk. My knees nearly gave out. On the screen, Brady noticed it. The change in my son was immediate and heartbreaking. His body stiffened, his eyes went wide, his mouth opened. He looked toward the kitchen, then back at the snake. The younger officer spoke quietly, almost to himself. He's calling out. You can see it, but no one can hear him. The television blared. In the kitchen, the milk mixer whirred. Brady stood up. His hands shook. He took a step back, then another toward the crib. Oh, Brady, I whispered, tears streaming freely now. He rushed forward, panic written across his small face. He reached into the crib, trying to lift Ella the way he'd seen adults do. But he was 6. His arms weren't strong enough. His balance wasn't steady. His foot caught the leg of the coffee table. He stumbled, and then, God help me, I saw it. As Brady fell, he twisted his body. He turned himself, so he would hit the floor first. So the baby wouldn't. The impact made me flinch, even though it was only on a screen. Ella screamed. The snake vanished from the frame, startled by the noise. Seconds later, Valerie burst back into the room, her face a mask of horror and misunderstanding. Then my parents rushed in from the backyard. Philip paused the video. The room was dead silent. The older officer exhaled slowly. Your grandson, he said, voice thick with emotion, was trying to save the baby. Philip zoomed in on Brady's face at the moment he saw the snake. Look at his expression, Philip said quietly. That's fear, real fear. The officer pulled out his phone and snapped several photos of the screen. We'll need a copy of this footage, he said, immediately. Philip nodded and inserted a USB drive. Already doing it. As the file transferred, something inside my chest broke open. My son wasn't just innocent. He was brave. And while the world had been ready to label him dangerous, he had been acting on pure instinct to protect. When Philip handed the USB to the officer, the weight of it felt enormous, like it carried more than video. It carried my son's name, his future, his right to be believed. "We need to return to the house," the officer said gently. "This changes everything." We didn't walk back. We almost ran. The path between the houses felt endless despite being only a couple of minutes long. My thoughts raced ahead of my body. Brady in the corner, Carter shielding him, Valerie insisting she was right. Howard walked ahead of us, shoulders hunched, guilt bending his spine. "I abandoned my grandson," he muttered, barely audible. I wanted to comfort him. But all I could think about was my child, waiting in that room, not knowing the truth was finally coming. As we reached the gate, raised voices spilled out of the house. Carter's voice, sharp, controlled fury. Valerie's, defensive, desperate. My mom's pleading for calm. The officer quickened his pace. So did I. Because the truth was in my hands now, and I was done letting my son be alone with a lie. Carter's voice was the first thing I heard when we pushed open the front door. "You do not get to treat my child like that." His words cut through the room like glass. Valerie fired back immediately, her voice shrill with defensiveness. "I'm protecting my daughter. You'd do the same if you saw what I saw." "Enough!" The older police officer stepped into the center of the living room, his presence snapping the room into sudden stillness. Everyone turned. Carter stood in front of Brady, his body angled protectively, one hand still resting on my son's shoulder. Brady clung to the back of Carter's jacket like it was a lifeline, his small fingers twisted in the fabric. My mom stood near this couch, her hands wringing together, eyes red and swollen. My dad followed us in, his face pale, shoulders bowed. Valerie froze when she saw the officer holding up his phone. "We've reviewed video evidence from a neighboring security camera," the officer said clearly, professionally. "And we can confirm that the child did not intentionally harm the baby." The room seemed to lose its air. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Carter turned to me, his eyes wide, not with shock, but with something like release. Like the truth he'd held on to alone had finally been acknowledged by the world. I nodded, my throat tight. "The snake," I said, my voice shaking, but loud enough to fill the space. "Brady tried to save Ella from a snake." Brady's head lifted slowly from Carter's back. His eyes, red and swollen, flicked from face to face, searching for confirmation. He looked like a child waking up from a nightmare and needing to know whether it was really over. The officer stepped closer and turned his phone so everyone could see. Clear images filled the screen. A snake slithering across the windowsill. Brady's face twisted in terror. His small body twisted as he fell, protecting the baby. "This footage clearly shows fear and instinctive protective behavior," the officer said. "There is no evidence of malicious intent." My mom gasped and covered her mouth as a sob escaped her. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, what did we do?" Carter dropped to his knees and pulled Brady into his arms fully now, no longer holding back. Brady buried his face in Carter's chest and shook, not from fear anymore, but from the release of it. "I told you," Brady whispered, his voice breaking. "There was a snake." Carter closed his eyes, his own breath hitching. "I know, buddy," he murmured. "I know." Valerie stood completely still. The color drained from her face as realization settled in. Her eyes darted to the images, then to Brady, then to me. Her mouth opened, closed. She sank into the nearest chair like her legs had forgotten how to work. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Brady." She looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time since I'd arrived, her expression wasn't righteous or angry. It was horrified. "I thought," her voice cracked. "I panicked. I didn't think—" Howard stepped forward before she could say anything else. He knelt slowly in front of Brady, his large hands trembling. "Grandpa was wrong," he said, his voice thick with shame. "I should have listened to you. I should have believed you." Brady lifted his head just enough to look at him. There was no anger in my son's eyes, just confusion. And something else that hurt worse. Distance. Sylvia broke down completely then, collapsing onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. "What have we done to our grandchild?" she cried. "How could we let this happen?" The older officer cleared his throat gently. "We'll be withdrawing the initial report and filing a corrected one," he said. "There will be no charges." The younger officer nodded, already writing. Philip stood near the door, quiet, holding himself apart from the family storm he'd helped stop. Sylvia looked up through her tears. "Mr. Whitman," she said desperately, "please stay for dinner. Please, we don't know how to thank you." Philip shook his head gently. I think your family needs time, he said kindly. I'm glad the truth came out. When the officers and Philip left, the door closed with a soft click that sounded too final for such a broken room. Silence rushed in. Valerie stood slowly, her movements careful, uncertain. Brady, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I never should have. Brady flinched. It was subtle, but it destroyed me. Carter stood immediately, stepping between them. Please don't, he said quietly but firmly. Not right now. Valerie froze. My chest burned with 1,000 things I wanted to say, but none of them would help Brady. Howard straightened, his face hollow. We all failed him. I swallowed hard. Yes, I said, you did. The words weren't cruel. They were necessary. I turned to Carter, and without speaking, we both knew. We couldn't stay. This house, this room, had become unsafe in a way walls couldn't fix. Come on, Brady, Carter said softly. Let's go home. Brady didn't resist. He wrapped one arm around Carter's neck, the other around me when I joined them, and let us lift him. As we walked toward the door, I felt Valerie watching us, watching her mistake walk away. Outside, the sun was still shining. Birds still chirped. The world hadn't paused for my son's terror. But as we drove away, I knew something fundamental had changed. Truth had come back with us, but trust hadn't. And I didn't know if it ever would. The first night after we brought Brady home, he woke up screaming. Not a loud scream. Those stop on their own. This was the kind that ripped out of his chest, like his body was reliving something his mind didn't know how to name yet. Carter bolted upright before I even processed the sound. By the time I reached Brady's room, Carter was already sitting on the edge of the bed, pulling my son into his arms. It's okay, he whispered over and over, like repetition could build a wall against memory. You're safe. You're home. Brady clung to him with a desperation that made my throat close. I thought they were going to take me, he sobbed. The police. I thought I was bad. I knelt beside the bed, pressing my forehead to his hair. No, I said fiercely. You were brave. You were protecting someone. You did nothing wrong. But the words didn't land the way I wanted them to. Because fear doesn't listen to logic, especially in children. Over the next few days, the cracks widened. Brady startled at sudden noises. He refused to sleep alone. He flinched whenever someone raised their voice, even if it was on TV. And snakes, plastic ones, drawings and books, even the word itself, sent him spiraling. One afternoon, I found him sitting on the floor in his room, lining up his dinosaur toys in a perfect row again and again, like he was trying to impose order on something that had spun wildly out of control. That's when Carter and I knew this wasn't something love alone could fix. We found a child psychologist, Dr. Monroe, a woman with calm eyes and a voice that never rushed. Brady didn't talk much at first. He drew pictures instead. Pictures of windows, pictures of people standing far away, pictures of a small stick figure lying on the floor while taller figures loomed. Dr. Monroe explained gently what Carter and I already felt in our bones. The trauma isn't the fall, she said. It's the betrayal of not being believed, especially by family. That sentence stayed with me, because I realized something painful. Brady hadn't been hurt by a snake. He'd been hurt by adults. Valerie sent apology cards, gifts, stuffed animals, letters filled with regret and explanations. She called every week. At first, Carter didn't even tell Brady she'd called. She lost the right to access him just because she feels guilty, he said quietly one night as we sat at the kitchen table, exhaustion heavy between us. I didn't argue. I couldn't. My parents came next, Howard and Sylvia, standing awkwardly on our doorstep with toys Brady used to love. Brady accepted them politely. He even hugged them. But something was different. The unquestioning trust was gone. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Children don't always get angry. Sometimes they just pull back. Summer passed. Brady went to school. He laughed again. He grew. But on quiet afternoons, I'd catch him staring out the window, eyes too thoughtful for a 6-year-old. One evening, after Carter tucked him in, Brady called me back to his room. Mom? He asked softly. Yes, baby? He hesitated. Why don't adults believe kids? The question shattered me. I sat beside him and wrapped my arms around his small body, wishing I could give him an answer that didn't hurt. Sometimes, I said carefully, adults get scared. And when they're scared, they forget how to listen. He nodded slowly, like that explanation fit into something he was already building inside himself. When winter came, my parents asked about Christmas. Valerie asked if she could visit again, with Ella. I didn't say no, but I didn't say yes either. Because trust isn't rebuilt by holidays or apologies or time alone. It's rebuilt by consistency, by boundaries, by showing a child that their safety matters more than family tradition. A few weeks ago, Valerie came by with Ella. Carter and I let them in. But when I called Brady downstairs, he shook his head from the top of the steps. "I don't want to," he said simply. I didn't force him. That night, after Brady fell asleep, Carter and I sat in the kitchen, the house quiet around us. "We're doing the right thing," Carter said, not as a question, but as reassurance. I nodded. Because if there's one thing this taught me, it's this. Love without protection is not love. Listening to children isn't optional. And once trust is broken, especially a child's trust, it doesn't come back just because someone feels sorry. I still hope. I hope that one day our family can heal, but not at the cost of my son's sense of safety. Not ever again. Because if there's one truth I'll carry forward, it's this. Always listen to children. Believe them. Protect them, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's family.